What if everything modern psychology teaches us about emotional resilience was already known and mastered by ancient tribes thousands of years ago? Picture a world without therapists, self-help books, or even the concept of mental health as we know it. Yet somehow, these communities thrived through famine, war, and unimaginable hardship, emerging not just intact but stronger. How did they do it? The answer lies in something far deeper than survival instincts. It's a code of emotional strength passed down through generations, woven into their daily lives, and strikingly similar to the principles of stoicism. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That same truth echoed in the rituals, stories, and unspoken rules of tribal societies. They understood that resilience wasn't about avoiding pain, but mastering the way they responded to it. This video isn't just a history lesson, it's a rediscovery of lost wisdom. Long before Stoic philosophers put pen to parchment, ancient tribes were living their teachings, turning adversity into fuel, fear into focus, and chaos into clarity. From the Inuit hunters of the Arctic to the Maasai warriors of Africa, each culture developed its own blueprint for emotional fortitude. But beneath the surface, their methods shared a common thread: the deliberate cultivation of inner strength. They didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Every day demanded courage, discipline, and an unshakable connection to purpose. And here's the most compelling part: their strategies weren't reserved for the elite or the spiritually gifted. They were woven into the fabric of ordinary life, taught through stories, ceremonies, and the quiet example of elders. What can we learn from these time-tested practices? How might their wisdom reshape the way we face our own challenges? That's the journey we're about to take together. We'll explore the unwritten rules that governed emotional strength in ancient tribes, seen through the lens of Stoic philosophy. You'll discover how tribes turned suffering into a rite of passage, why they embraced discomfort as a teacher, and how their collective mindset fostered unbreakable resilience. This isn't about romanticizing the past, it's about uncovering universal truths that still hold power today. By the end, you won't just understand their secrets. You'll see how to apply them to your own life, transforming the way you navigate stress, uncertainty, and even pain. So let's step into this forgotten classroom of human strength, where the lessons are ancient but the impact is timeless. Seneca once wrote, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness but also for silence." This wasn't just poetic advice. For ancient tribes, silence wasn't empty space, it was sacred ground. Imagine a warrior returning from battle, covered in dust and adrenaline, yet instead of boasting or breaking down, he sits by the fire without a word. That silence wasn't weakness, it was strength in its purest form, a deliberate pause between feeling and action, what the Stoics called the discipline of ascent. Tribes from the Lakota Plains to the Sami people of Scandinavia wove silence into daily life like a golden thread. Elders taught that words spoken in anger couldn't be taken back, so they trained their people to let storms of emotion pass before responding. Here's why this matters. Modern neuroscience confirms what these cultures knew instinctively. When we pause, even for 3 deep breaths, we activate the prefrontal cortex, the brain's braking system for emotional reactions. The Maasai had a ritual called Nkigina, where disputes were settled only after a night of silent reflection. No interrupting, no justifying, just space for truth to rise like sediment settling in water. Compare that to today's world of rapid-fire texts and heated social media replies. We've forgotten that silence isn't passive, it's the anvil where raw emotion gets forged into wisdom. Think of the last time someone cut you off in traffic or sent a frustrating email. Your body likely reacted before your mind could catch up, pulse racing, jaw tightening. Now picture an Inuit hunter waiting motionless for hours at a seal's breathing hole. His survival depended on mastering impatience, on treating discomfort as a teacher rather than an enemy. That same principle applies when your coworker takes credit for your idea or your partner says something careless. Silence becomes the gap where you reclaim choice, to respond instead of react, to act from values rather than impulses. This ancient practice mirrors Stoic journaling exercises, where Marcus Aurelius would interrogate his own thoughts before letting them take root. Both traditions recognized a universal truth: emotions aren't the problem, unchecked emotional reactions are. Tribes didn't suppress feelings, they created space to witness them. A Cherokee elder might tell his grandson, "Inside you there are two wolves fighting, one angry, one calm. The one who wins is the one you feed." Silence was how they starved the reactive wolf. Consider how this transforms modern conflicts. A study from the University of California found that couples who instituted a 10-second pause before responding during arguments reported 30% higher relationship satisfaction. That's not coincidence, it's applied ancient wisdom. Whether it's a hunter resisting the urge to flee at a rustling bush or a parent counting to 10 before disciplining a child, the mechanism is identical. Silence trains the mind to separate stimulus from response, proving Epictetus right. We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. What made tribal practices extraordinary wasn't just the use of silence, but its integration into everyday life. Children learned it through games that rewarded stillness. Warriors practiced it during initiation rites, sitting motionless for days without complaint. Even storytelling, the heartbeat of tribal education, often began with long pauses, teaching listeners to absorb before interpreting. Compare that to our world of constant notifications, where we've conditioned ourselves to treat pauses as awkward rather than transformative. The Stoics called this the discipline of perception, recognizing that between what happens and what we make it mean, there's always a space. And in that space lies our power to choose strength over suffering. In the pre-dawn darkness of the Amazon rainforest, a tribesman would rise and stand knee-deep in the river, letting the icy water jolt his senses awake. This wasn't just hygiene, it was a daily baptism in discipline, a ritual as precise as a Stoic's morning meditation. Across continents and centuries, ancient cultures crafted routines that did more than structure their days, they fortified their minds. Epictetus, the once enslaved philosopher who became a beacon of Stoicism, put it bluntly: first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Tribal rituals were the living embodiment of that principal: physical acts that carved mental grooves of resilience. Take the Maori warriors of New Zealand, whose haka dance was far more than performance. Every stomp, every chant, every synchronized breath served as an emotional reset button, channeling fear into focus, doubt into determination. Modern science calls this embodied cognition, the idea that our bodies shape our thoughts as much as the reverse. When a Zulu warrior prepared his shield for battle, the repetitive motions of polishing leather and tightening straps weren't just practical. They anchored his mind in the present moment, quieting the noise of what-ifs. Sound familiar? It's the same mechanism behind today's mindfulness apps and breathwork trends, except tribes didn't need subscriptions or influencers to teach them. Their rituals were baked into survival itself. Consider the Japanese samurai's tea ceremony, where the precise folding of a silk cloth mirrored the folding of one's attention. Or the Native American vision quest, where days of solitude and fasting stripped away distractions, forcing confrontation with inner truths. These weren't esoteric traditions, they were psychological tools disguised as culture. The Stoics knew this power too. Marcus Aurelius began each day by visualizing the irritations he might face, not to dwell on negativity but to rehearse calm responses. Both traditions recognized a profound truth: repetition breeds readiness. When crisis strikes, we don't rise to the occasion, we default to our training. Here's where modern life stumbles. We've outsourced our rituals to convenience. Scrolling replaces journaling, caffeine substitutes for centering breaths, and the closest many get to a morning routine is slapping a snooze button. Yet research from Duke University reveals that nearly 40% of our daily actions are habitual, proof that we're creatures of ritual whether we acknowledge it or not. The difference: ancient tribes consciously designed rituals to cultivate strength, while we often fall into patterns that erode it. This isn't about recreating tribal ceremonies in your apartment. It's about recognizing the why behind them. A Navajo weaver tying knots into a rug wasn't just making art. Each twist was a meditation on patience. The Greek Stoics had their own version, pausing before meals to reflect on the chain of hands that brought food to their tables, forging gratitude through routine. Both practices shared a common goal: to transform mundane acts into mental armor. So ask yourself this: what's your modern equivalent? Maybe it's 5 minutes staring at the steam rising from your coffee, noticing how worries dissipate like vapor. Or the deliberate act of shutting your laptop at day's end, signaling to your brain that work doesn't own your nights. The form doesn't matter, the intentionality does. Like the Inuit fisherman who chipped a hole in the ice each morning, not just for food but for the rhythm it gave his mind, your rituals are the architecture of your resilience. Start small but start sacred. Let each repetition whisper what tribal elders and Stoic sages knew: discipline isn't deprivation, it's the daily practice of becoming unshakable. Heraclitus, the philosopher who famously said no man steps in the same river twice, would have felt at home among the ancient tribes who understood impermanence as life's only constant. While modern minds often rage against change, clinging to outdated plans, resisting new realities, tribal societies saw fluidity as sacred. The Stoics called this amor fati, the love of fate. But long before Roman philosophers coined the term, a Navajo grandmother teaching her granddaughter to weave would whisper, "The pattern changes when the wool runs thin. That's not a mistake, that's the story." Consider the Inuit facing an unexpected thaw. When ice shelves cracked unpredictably, they didn't waste energy cursing the weather. Instead, they reinvented hunting routes within hours, treating adaptability as a spiritual practice. Anthropologists recorded one elder's response to a devastating caribou migration shift: "The land isn't failing us, it's speaking. Our job is to listen." This wasn't passive surrender but active collaboration with change, what psychologist Carl Rogers would later identify as the core of resilience: the curious paradox that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change. Contrast that with how we often handle disrupted plans today. A delayed flight sparks outrage. A career setback becomes identity-shattering. Yet neuroscience reveals why tribal wisdom works. Resisting change activates the brain's amygdala, flooding us with stress hormones, while acceptance engages the prefrontal cortex, allowing creative problem solving. The Maori had a practice called wakatoki, proverbs recited during upheaval, like "turn your face to the sun, and the shadows fall behind you." These weren't platitudes but cognitive tools, rewiring minds to perceive change as a compass rather than a threat. There's a Cherokee story about a village destroyed by flood. As survivors clung to debris, the elder shouted, "Stop fighting the current, swim sideways to the eddy." That's the essence of amor fati, not drowning in what's lost but navigating toward what exists. Modern research on post-traumatic growth echoes this, showing that those who accept unavoidable hardship often emerge with deeper purpose, just as forest fires trigger certain seeds to sprout. So here's an invitation. Recall a recent change you resisted, a missed promotion, a relationship ending, even a disrupted weekend plan. Now imagine treating it like tribal hunters treated shifting seasons, as information, not injustice. The Stoic philosopher Seneca lost his entire fortune overnight, yet wrote, "Fortune takes much but not everything." That's the tribal mindset too. When the Mongolian steppes froze over, herders didn't mourn last summer's grass. They sang to the stars while carving ice into water for their herds. Suffering comes not from change itself, but from the stories we cling to about how things should be. Release the story, and like those tribal ancestors, you'll find yourself not just enduring change but dancing with it. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Ancient tribes lived this principle daily, turning their communities into living mirrors for emotional growth. In the smoke-filled longhouses of the Iroquois nations, young warriors didn't just receive orders, they sat through hours of deliberate counsel where every decision was examined from multiple perspectives. An elder might turn to a hot-headed youth and ask, "How would your mother see this raid?" Or, "What would your enemy say about your plan?" This wasn't mere discussion, it was emotional cross-training. The Stoics called this practice the discipline of assent, pausing to examine impressions before accepting them as truth. Tribes institutionalized this through rituals like the Lakota, talking circle, where a feather passed hand to hand meant you spoke only when holding it, and others reflected your words back to you without judgment. Modern psychology now confirms what these cultures knew: we're terrible at self-assessment. A Harvard study found that people overestimate their emotional intelligence by 30%, a gap tribal societies close through constant communal feedback. Imagine a Maasai father presenting his son with a poorly crafted spear. Instead of scolding him, the entire village would examine the weapon, pointing out flaws with precise observations. The balance is off by 2 fingers width, or this notch will crack under pressure. The lesson wasn't about spear making, it was about developing the emotional resilience to hear hard truths without crumbling. Compare that to today's participation trophy culture, where constructive criticism often triggers defensiveness rather than growth. Here's where ancient wisdom meets modern science. Behavioral researchers at Stanford discovered that groups practicing radical candor, blunt but caring feedback, show 40% higher problem-solving accuracy. The Zulu people had a word for this centuries ago, Ubuntu, meaning "I am because we are." Their warriors trained in groups called Amabatho, where every mistake was dissected publicly, not to shame but to strengthen the collective. As Seneca observed, "The wounds of a friend are better than the kisses of an enemy." This week, try a tribal approach to feedback. Ask 3 trusted people, "What's one behavior of mine that might limit my growth?" Don't argue or explain, just listen, as a Lakota elder would listen to the wind for messages. Modern life has trained us to armor ourselves against criticism, but tribal wisdom reminds us, a mirror doesn't lie, and neither does a community that cares enough to tell you when you have food in your teeth or fear in your heart. The Stoics kept journals to spot their own blind spots. Tribes kept each other accountable through relentless honesty. Both paths lead to the same destination: emotional clarity forged in the fire of truth. Seneca once observed, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." This truth was etched into the bones of ancient tribes through stories told under starlight narratives that did far more than entertain. They were psychological blueprints teaching children how to grieve, warriors how to endure, and elders how to remember. Take the West African tale of the spider Anansi, who outsmarts a leopard not with strength but by twisting vines into ropes of deception. On the surface, it's a clever fable, but listen deeper. It's a masterclass in reframing limitations as advantages, mirroring the Stoic practice of turning obstacles into fuel. Every culture had its version. The Inuit spoke of Sedna, the goddess whose fingers became sea creatures after she was betrayed, a story that transformed suffering into sustenance. The Norse told of Tyr sacrificing his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir, illustrating that some victories demand painful trade-offs. These weren't just myths, they were emotional rehearsals. When a young Apache boy heard how the trickster coyote kept walking when the mountain seemed too steep, he wasn't just learning folklore, he was downloading mental software for perseverance. Modern psychology calls this narrative identity theory, the idea that we make sense of our lives through stories. Tribes simply weaponized it first. Compare this to modern therapy, where patients rewrite traumatic memories by changing their internal narratives. The technique is strikingly similar to the Cherokee boiling pot stories, where characters emerge stronger from metaphorical fires. Or consider the Japanese practice of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, a physical manifestation of the Stoic belief that cracks are where wisdom enters. The difference: ancient stories were preventive medicine, immunizing communities against despair before hardship struck. Here's your challenge. Think of a moment when a story, whether from a book, a film, or a grandparent's lips, changed how you faced adversity. Maybe it was Harry Potter's Dumbledore saying, "Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times," or your father recounting how he bounced back after losing his job. These narratives function like Seneca's letters to Lucilius, personal, practical, and packed with emotional tools. Share yours in the comments, not as a polished tale, but as raw material others might forge into strength. Because as the Griots of Mali knew well, a story untold is a sword unsharpened. The right words at the right time don't just comfort, they arm you for battle. When the Stoic philosopher Epictetus declared, "Difficulties show men what they are," he could have been describing the initiation rites of countless ancient tribes. Pain wasn't something to avoid, it was the sacred fire that forged identity. Take the Maasai warriors' Unoto ceremony, where young men endured days without sleep while elders pierced their skin with sharpened sticks. Not torture, but transformation, each drop of blood a baptism into manhood, each moment of exhaustion proof they could transcend limits. This mirrors the Stoic principle of sympatheia, the belief that struggle isn't opposed to growth but essential to it, like roots breaking through rock to find water. Modern gym culture unknowingly echoes this ancient wisdom. That burning sensation in your muscles during the final set. The Dakota Sioux had their version, running for miles with mouthfuls of water to train breath control, spitting it out only at the finish line. Both practices share a truth neuroscience now confirms. Voluntary discomfort rewires the brain's pain pathways, teaching us that suffering is often a signal of growth, not danger. A study from the University of Wisconsin found people who reframed workout pain as progress increased endurance by 23%, proof that tribal initiation rites and Stoic philosophy were onto something profound. Consider the Aboriginal walkabout, where adolescents survived alone in the wilderness for months. They returned not just with survival skills, but with what psychologist Abraham Maslow would call self-actualization, an unshakable knowing of who they were when stripped of comforts. Compare that to modern boot camps or wilderness therapy programs where stripped-down conditions consistently produce breakthroughs. The mechanism is identical. forced encounter with raw existence, what Epictetus called the wrestling school of the soul. Here's the invitation buried in these traditions. Recall a moment when hardship sculpted your character. Maybe it was recovering from an injury that taught patience, or a brutal work project that revealed depths of perseverance you didn't know you had. Tribal cultures ritualized these experiences because they understood what we often forget: pain without purpose is torture, but pain with meaning becomes initiation. The Stoics didn't just endure suffering, they interrogated it, asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" Like a Laco to elder reading tracks in the snow. That marathon you finished, that degree earned through all-nighters, even that heartbreak that reshaped your understanding of love, these are your modern-day vision quests. The rituals have changed, but the alchemy remains: pressure transforming coal into diamond, struggle turning fragility into fortitude. As the Maori proverb goes, turn your face to the wind, and you'll never be blown over. Every culture that mastered emotional strength knew this secret, not in spite of the storm, but because of it. Marcus Aurelius gazed at the stars and wrote, "What is good for the hive is good for the bee." Ancient tribes didn't just live in nature, they studied it like a sacred text, deciphering lessons in emotional balance from the rustling leaves and rushing rivers. Watch a storm dismantle a decades-old tree in minutes, only for seedlings to sprout in its decaying trunk by spring. That's nature's masterclass in detachment, showing that endings fertilize beginnings, a truth the Stoics echoed when they spoke of amor fati. The Cherokee didn't mourn fallen trees, they carved them into canoes, teaching children that loss and utility are two sides of the same hand. Consider the Arctic tundra, where caribou herds thin their own numbers during scarce winters, not from cruelty, but from an instinctual understanding that survival demands sacrifice. The Inuit hunters who witnessed this didn't see tragedy, they saw a mirror for human resilience. When food stores ran low, they'd recall the caribou's example, embracing hunger as a temporary season rather than a catastrophe. Modern psychology confirms this wisdom. Studies on stress inoculation show that those who view hardship as cyclical, like weather patterns, recover 40% faster from adversity. This is where forest bathing, Japan's practice of Shinrin-yoku, bridges ancient and modern. Scientists measuring cortisol levels found that just 20 minutes among trees lowers stress hormones more effectively than a meditation app. But tribes went further. They didn't just passively receive nature's calm, they actively decoded its harsh lessons. A Kalahari bushman tracking a wounded antelope would note how the animal kept moving despite injury, its breath steady until the last moment. That observation became a mental model for enduring pain without surrender. Here's your challenge for 1 week: observe nature like a tribal scout. Not just the golden sunrise, but the way spiderwebs rebuild after rain, teaching resilience. Notice how rivers carve canyons not by force but persistence, each ripple a stoic exercise in gradual progress. When you spot a cracked acorn sprouting through concrete, ask yourself, what in my life needs that same stubborn growth? The answers won't come from analysis, but from the quiet kinship that arises when you stand knee-deep in a stream, feeling the currents pull as both obstacle and ally. The earth has been whispering these truths for millennia. Lean in closer. Seneca once warned, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." This truth was woven into the fabric of ancient tribal life, where possessions flowed like water, freely given, freely released. Among the Pacific Northwest's Kwakiutl tribes, a leader might give away his entire stockpile of blankets during a potlatch ceremony, not as charity but as a spiritual act. To them, wealth wasn't measured by what you accumulated but by what you could afford to release. This wasn't just economics, it was embodied stoicism, a living practice of what the ancients called indifference to externals. Modern consumerism operates on the opposite principle. We chase the dopamine hit of a new purchase, only to find the thrill fading faster than the packaging decomposes in a landfill. Tribal gift economies reveal the flaw in this cycle. They understood possessions as temporary tools, not extensions of identity. A Mongolian nomad's most prized possession, his horse, might be gifted to a visiting stranger if the need arose, because the tribe's survival mattered more than individual ownership. Compare that to today's culture, where people rent storage units to hold excess belongings they haven't touched in years. The Stoics would nod knowingly, Seneca wrote. Until we have begun to go without them, we fail to realize how unnecessary many things are. Here's where tribal wisdom becomes shockingly practical. Anthropologists studying the Hadza people of Tanzania found that their entire material wealth, tools, clothing, utensils averaged just 25 items per adult. Yet psychological studies consistently rank them among the happiest populations on Earth. This isn't primitive deprivation, it's curated freedom. Like a Stoic discarding unnecessary opinions, they carried only what served an immediate purpose. Their sharing economy wasn't a trendy app, but a survival strategy turned spiritual practice, proof that lightness of being comes from letting go, not gathering more. Try this experiment for 1 week. Track every item you touch, not just your phone or wallet, but the coffee mug you grab out of habit, the stack of magazines you move without reading. Then ask Seneca's question, does this possession make me more virtuous or more vulnerable? The Maori had a tradition called koha, where the most valuable gifts were often returned to the giver after a time, symbolizing that nothing is permanently owned. Apply that mindset to your closet, your garage, even your digital clutter. When the Lakota said, "The more you own, the more owns you," they weren't preaching poverty, they were offering a key to emotional sovereignty. What remains when you strip away the non-essentials? Not emptiness, but space for breath, for stillness, for the unexpected opportunities that arise when you're not weighed down by things you're afraid to lose. The tribes knew it, the Stoics wrote it, and somewhere between your overstuffed drawers and crowded calendar, your soul remembers it too. True wealth isn't about having what you want, but wanting what you already have, and being unafraid to let it go when the moment calls. Epictetus warned his students, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the ocean in a drop." This wasn't poetic exaggeration. Ancient tribes lived this truth daily, reading emotional currents with the precision of meteorologists tracking storms. In the communal longhouses of the Pacific Northwest, if one person's anxiety spiked before a hunt, elders wouldn't dismiss it as personal weakness, they'd halt the entire expedition. Not out of superstition, but because they recognized emotional states spread like wildfire. Modern science calls this limbic resonance, the neurological phenomenon where one person's amygdala activity can literally sync with another's. The Stoics foreshadowed this with their circle of control, the understanding that while we can't always choose our environment, we can choose what we absorb from it. Take the Dagara people of Burkina Faso. When a villager returned from war trembling with unseen wounds, the tribe didn't advise solitary healing. They'd gather at dusk for what anthropologists later termed emotional composting, singing, drumming, and dancing until a collective rhythm dissolved individual trauma into shared catharsis. Contrast that with today's open office layouts, where one coworker's bad mood can poison productivity for entire teams without anyone naming the contagion. A Yale study found that negative emotional energy spreads 3 times faster than positive in workplaces, proof that tribes weren't just being poetic when they spoke of shared breath. Here's where ancient wisdom becomes tactical. The Sami reindeer herders of Scandinavia practiced joiking, improvising songs that mirrored another person's emotional state until the singer and subject harmonized. It was empathy weaponized, a real-time emotional reset button. Modern managers could learn from this. Instead of powering through tense meetings, what if we took a Sami-inspired pause? A simple, let's joik this moment where teammates name the unspoken mood: frustration, fear, excitement before problem solving. Research from the University of Michigan shows teams that acknowledge emotional undercurrents make decisions 40% faster because they're not subconsciously battling invisible tensions. Your challenge this week: conduct an emotional influence audit. For 3 days, track how different environments shape your inner weather. Does scrolling social media leave you as drained as the Iroquois believed negative gossip could poison a whole village? Does your morning coffee ritual bring the centering focus of a Maori warrior's pre-battle chant? The Stoics kept procesche attention journals to spot these patterns. You needn't carve notches in wood like tribal elders. A notes app works fine. The goal isn't to eliminate all negative influences, that's impossible, but to become as intentional about your emotional diet as you are about food. After all, the Inuit didn't just eat whatever the ice provided. They knew some nourishment came with hidden costs. Your mind deserves the same discernment. Tribes had one advantage we often lack: constant feedback loops. In the Amazon, if someone's energy disrupted the group, they'd hear about it before sunset through rituals like the Yanomamis, Rise He ceremony, part confrontation, part healing circle. We've replaced this with passive-aggressive Slack messages and bottled-up resentment, yet the mechanism remains unchanged. Emotions are communal property. Whether in a corporate boardroom or a Bronze Age roundhouse, the air between us carries more than oxygen. It carries the unspoken rules of survival. Choose your atmosphere as carefully as your ancestors chose their hunting grounds, and you'll master what Epictetus called the art of being unshaken. A Maasai warrior standing motionless before a lion hunt wasn't just conserving energy. He was entering what Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the deliberate rehearsal of challenges before they strike. Marcus Aurelius described this practice as seeing the future without flinching, a mental armor forged in advance. Tribal hunters from the Arctic tundra to the Amazon basin shared this ritual. The moment before action wasn't for panic or bravado, but for the quiet calibration of breath and intention. The Comanche would press their palms to the earth, feeling the pulse of the land synchronize with their heartbeat, while Zulu impis practiced rhythmic breathing so precise, their exhales matched the spacing of spear throws. Modern neuroscience reveals why these techniques worked. Controlled breathing activates the vagus nerve, slamming the brakes on fight or flight responses. The Inuit practiced kanaktuonik, holding breath until the vision blurred, not as endurance tests but as neural training. When a hunter's life depended on steady hands during a seal's fleeting surfacing, adrenaline couldn't be wasted on tremors. This mirrors elite athletes' pre-game routines today. A basketball player's free throw ritual or a diver's repetitive toe taps before leaping aren't superstitions, they're physiological resets. A study in the Journal of Sports Sciences found that archers who added tribal-style breath holds to their routine improved accuracy by 18%. Here's how to adapt this ancient protocol. Each morning, steal 5 minutes not for planning your day, but for preparing your mind. Sit with your back straight as a spear shaft, inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 7, exhaling for 8. This 4-7-8 pattern mirrors the Stoic discipline of ascent, creating space between stimulus and response. As you breathe, visualize a challenge you'll face, a difficult conversation, a looming deadline. See yourself navigating it with the calm of a hunter tracking prey, alert but relaxed, focused but fluid. The Maori had a saying, "The warrior's strength is in his stillness." This isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about channeling them. A samurai's tea ceremony before battle and a CEO's silent minute before a board meeting share the same root. The recognition that composure isn't the absence of pressure, but mastery of it. Your ritual might involve tracing a finger along the rim of your coffee cup like a Lakota counting coop feathers, or staring at a single leaf until its edges sharpen into clarity. The form matters less than the function, teaching your nervous system that between the chaos of life and the choices you make, there's always a breath. And in that breath, like the Stoics and tribal warriors knew, lies the power to act rather than react. Seneca wrote, "He who has gratitude has everything." Yet long before ink dried on those words, tribal societies were living this truth as a matter of survival. Imagine an Ainu hunter in ancient Japan bowing to the bear he'd just slain, whispering thanks for its sacrifice, or the Lakota pausing before drinking from a stream, offering gratitude to the water spirits before quenching their thirst. These weren't empty rituals, they were psychological armor against despair. When famine struck, tribes who'd practiced daily thanksgiving could recall seasons of abundance, while those who hadn't fixated only on their empty bellies. Modern neuroscience now confirms their wisdom. Gratitude activates the hypothalamus, regulating stress and hunger signals more effectively than any survival manual. Consider the Cherokee Booger dance, where villagers wore masks representing their worst fears: starvation, enemy raids, sickness, then laughed while dancing with them. At first glance, it seems like simple theatrics, but look deeper. It was negative visualization in motion, the Stoic practice of premeditating loss to appreciate the present. By embodying their fears, they drained them of power while sharpening gratitude for what remained. The Hadza of Tanzania took this further, holding epime feasts where they'd list every edible plant that hadn't grown that year, not to dwell on lack, but to heighten appreciation for what the earth still provided. This tribal mindset explains why modern gratitude journaling boosts resilience. A Harvard study found participants who recorded 3 daily blessings for 6 months showed 21% lower cortisol levels. But tribes went beyond listing, they ritualized thankfulness. The Maori Wakapapa chants traced food from soil to table, linking each meal to ancestors and earth. Compare that to hurried lunches at our desks while scrolling news feeds. The difference isn't time, it's intentionality. When the Yupik Eskimos caught their first salmon of spring, they honored it with 3 days of ceremonies before eating. That delay wasn't superstition, it was savoring anticipation, what psychologists now call delayed gratification sweet spot. Here's your 3-day challenge. First morning, eat breakfast with your non-dominant hand. Clumsiness will make you grateful for ordinary motor skills. At noon, list 5 sounds you'd miss if deaf: a child's laugh, rain on leaves. Come dusk, mentally lose your home for an hour. Picture returning to it as if after a disaster, seeing each scarred coffee cup and sun-faded curtain with fresh wonder. Day 2, thank someone who wronged you, not for the pain, but for the strength it forged. By day 3, you'll start noticing what Seneca called the invisible thread of gifts connecting each moment. Tribal gratitude wasn't passive, it was preparation. When the Mongols drank mare's milk, they spilled drops skyward for the gods first, remembering winters when even that bitter milk ran scarce. Like Stoics visualizing their own funerals to cherish life, they practiced loss to heighten presence. Your morning coffee tastes richer when you ponder the Colombian farmer who grew the beans, the trucker who delivered them, the ancestors who discovered brewing. Gratitude becomes not just an emotion, but a lens, one that transforms ordinary mornings into ceremonies and strangers into silent benefactors. The tribes knew what we often forget. thankfulness isn't just good manners, it's good survival strategy. Epictetus observed, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." This humility defined tribal councils, where gray-haired elders held not just respect but veto power over heated debates. The Lakota called them Wikasa, men whose words carried weight not because they shouted loudest, but because they'd survived droughts and wars that younger warriors had only heard in stories. Their decisions weren't swayed by adrenaline or ego. They operated with what Stoics called proherses, the disciplined use of reason over raw emotion. Picture a Cherokee war council where 20-year-olds argued for immediate retaliation after a raid, while 70-year-old elders traced patterns in the dirt, calculating winter food stores and moon cycles before speaking. Modern decision-making has inverted this wisdom. We swipe right on impulse, click buy now, under dopamine's influence, and form opinions from viral headlines rather than lived experience. Tribal councils would find this recklessness baffling. The Kung people of the Kalahari practiced something called Kezaro, where major choices required 3 days of discussion with elders, not to delay action, but to filter emotion through the sieve of collective memory. Neuroscience explains why this worked. fMRI scans show the prefrontal cortex, responsible for long-term thinking, isn't fully developed until age 25, while elders' brains excel at pattern recognition from decades of stored experience. Here's where Stoicism and tribal wisdom converge. When Epictetus said, "First learn the meaning of what you say and then speak," he mirrored the Maori tradition of Wakapapa. Before addressing the tribe, speakers would recite their ancestral lineage, grounding their words in centuries of inherited knowledge. Contrast that with today's tweet first, think later culture, where algorithms reward hot takes over hard-won insight. Try this experiment. Next time you face a major decision, whether changing jobs or ending a relationship, borrow the Haudenosaunee practice of the 7th generation. Ask yourself not just how this choice affects you now, but how it might ripple across 7 generations. Then seek out someone who's weathered similar crossroads. Not for blind obedience, but for what the Stoics termed probing judgments, testing your assumptions against tempered wisdom. The Dagara elders of Burkina Faso had a saying, "When the young warriors bring firewood, they stack it high but loose." The old women rearrange it to burn through the night. Emotional strength lies not in suppressing passion, but in letting experience arrange it into enduring warmth. Your modern tribe might be a retired mentor, a grandparent's journal, or even Marcus Aurelius' meditations, voices that whisper across centuries, reminding us that some fires should smolder rather than spark. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Let not your mind run on what you lack, but on what you have already. Of the things you have, select the best, and then reflect how eagerly you would have sought them if you did not have them." This wisdom echoes through the mourning rituals of ancient tribes, who understood grief not as an enemy to defeat but as a sacred fire to pass through. The Lakota people's ghost cry ceremony lasted exactly 4 days, no more, no less a structured container for sorrow that honored loss while preventing it from consuming the living. Women would slash their arms in precise patterns, not as self-harm but as physical manifestation of inner pain, letting blood carry grief back to the earth. Meanwhile, Stoic philosophers prescribed similar boundaries. Seneca advised setting a limit to our mourning, just as farmers know when to stop watering crops. Modern grief therapy is only now catching up to these ancient practices. The Wari people of Brazil would consume ashes of the deceased, believing incorporation ended separation. While extreme to contemporary sensibilities, the principle aligns with today's continuing bonds therapy. the idea that healing comes from transforming relationships with the departed rather than severing them. Psychologists at Columbia University found that patients who created rituals after loss, lighting candles at anniversaries, writing letters to the dead, showed 40% lower rates of prolonged grief disorder. The Maori tangi lasts 3 to 7 days, with mourners taking turns speaking directly to the body as if in conversation, releasing words that might otherwise fester in silence. Here's what tribal cultures knew that we often forget. Grief needs both expression and expiration dates. The Greek Stoics practiced negative visualization, imagining loved ones' deaths while they lived, not to breed morbidity, but to heighten appreciation and prepare the mind. Tribes institutionalized this through annual mourning ceremonies, like the Native American Feast of the Dead, where communities gathered to remember those lost that year, then symbolically washed their hands in unison. Modern science confirms the wisdom. Structured grieving activates the brain's anterior cingulate cortex, helping integrate loss without becoming trapped in it. Your challenge isn't to adopt tribal customs wholesale, but to borrow their intentionality. Design a personal closure ritual, perhaps burning written regrets in a bowl like the Tibetan sky burials, or planting bulbs that bloom annually as the Celts did. The key lies in creating a definitive act that marks the transition from active mourning to sacred memory. When the Wolof people of Senegal say, "Tears water the roots of the ancestors," they remind us that grief, like rain, is necessary but not endless. Let yours fall fully, then let the sun return. Seneca once wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage," a truth ancient tribes understood in their bones. While modern culture often equates strength with stoic silence or unbroken resilience, tribal societies saw something far more profound: the courage to stand bare before your community and name your fears aloud. Take the Maasai warriors' Unoto ceremony, where young men didn't just endure physical trials but publicly confessed their deepest doubts to elders. This wasn't humiliation, it was liberation. The Stoics called it prohersis, the willingness to examine and own one's flaws as the first step toward mastering them. Consider the Kwakiutl potlatch ceremonies of the Pacific Northwest, where leaders would compete not in displays of wealth but in admissions of failure. A chief might rise and recount a disastrous hunting expedition, detailing every misstep that left his people hungry. To outsiders, this seemed like self-sabotage. To the tribe, it was advanced emotional warfare, disarming shame by dragging it into the light. Modern research validates their approach. Studies on emotional labeling show that putting feelings into words reduces amygdala activity by nearly 50%, literally calming the brain's fear response. This tribal wisdom collides with today's vulnerability movements in surprising ways. When researcher Brené Brown speaks about the power of showing up imperfectly, she echoes the Dagara people's bone rituals, where villagers would gather to share stories of their most crushing defeats. The twist: these stories were followed not by pity but by a question. What did this loss teach you about surviving the next one? That's the Stoic tribal fusion: vulnerability as strategic preparation, not just catharsis. Here's where most modern self-help stops short. Tribal vulnerability wasn't indiscriminate oversharing. It was precision-targeted exposure. A Zulu warrior wouldn't confess battlefield terror to children at bedtime. He'd share it with his Ibatho, his age regiment brothers, who'd immediately counter with tactical solutions. The Inuit had a saying, "A seal hunter's fear keeps him alive, but only if he gives it to the right ears." Compare that to today's trend of broadcasting struggles to strangers online, often receiving hollow validation instead of actionable wisdom. Your challenge mirrors the Cherokee Booger dance, where masks representing weaknesses were worn not to hide but to transform. This week, share one honest limitation with someone equipped to help, not just listen. Tell your running partner about the knee pain you've ignored, not just your Instagram followers. Admit to your mentor, not the void of a journal where your confidence falters. Like the Maori warriors who pressed foreheads together in hongi, exchanging breath as they exchanged truths, find the person who can turn your admission into armor. Because as the Stoics knew and tribes lived, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to let others see you sharpen your spear in the dark. Epictetus once said, "Know first who you are and then adorn yourself accordingly." For ancient tribes, dreams weren't just random neural noise. They were nightly council meetings where the subconscious spoke in symbols, offering raw material for self-discovery. The Iroquois held dream-guessing ceremonies at dawn, where elders would interpret visions over shared tobacco, treating each dream as a coded message from the deeper self. This wasn't mysticism, it was emotional cartography, mapping inner landscapes with the same precision Stoics used when journaling at day's end. Modern sleep labs now confirm what these cultures knew intuitively. REM cycles activate the brain's emotional processing centers, sorting experiences like a nocturnal filing clerk. Consider the Senoi people of Malaysia, who turned dream analysis into a daily ritual. Children recounted dreams each morning at breakfast, with parents asking not what happened, but what did you do about it? If a child dreamed of fleeing a tiger, they'd be coached to confront it the next night, an ancient version of exposure therapy. Psychologists at Harvard studying trauma dreams found similar techniques reduce nightmare frequency by 70%. The Stoic parallel is striking. Just as Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Tribes believed recurring dreams revealed habitual emotional patterns needing rewiring. Modern therapy often treats dreams like puzzles to solve, but tribal approaches were more like mirrors to polish. The Dagara of West Africa practiced dream seeding, where elders would suggest intentional visions before sleep, perhaps of climbing a mountain or repairing a broken pot. Come morning, the dreamer and community would dissect the imagery not for prophecy but for emotional feedback loops. A torn pot might symbolize neglected relationships. The act of repairing it in the dreamscape became mental rehearsal for real-world reconciliation. CBT therapists now use similar imagery rescripting, where patients rewrite nightmare endings, proof that tribal dream work was cognitive behavioral therapy by firelight. Your challenge isn't to become a shamanic dream interpreter overnight. Start simpler. Keep a notebook by your bed and jot down 3 impressions upon waking: a color, a sensation, a fragment of dialogue. Look for patterns over weeks, like the Yakut shamans of Siberia tracking animal symbols across dreams. Notice when dream fear mirrors waking anxiety, or when solutions emerge in sleep that eluded daylight logic. Epictetus advised examining each impression like a merchant checking coins for authenticity. Hold your dreams up to the light of curiosity, not judgment. The Maori say dreams are the whispers of ancestors, but science suggests they're whispers from your own wiser self. Either way, the invitation stands: lean closer and listen. Marcus Aurelius gazed at the winter sky and wrote, "The universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it." Ancient tribes didn't just endure seasonal shifts, they revered them as emotional tuning forks, aligning their inner rhythms with Earth cycles long before Stoics coined living according to nature. When snow silenced the forests, the Sami people of Scandinavia didn't fight the stillness they entered, guarded it. A state of intentional dormancy where storytelling and dream interpretation replaced summer's relentless activity. Their winter drums weren't instruments of noise but of resonance, tuned to mimic the slow heartbeat of hibernating bears. Modern psychiatry now confirms their wisdom. Studies on seasonal affective disorder show human serotonin levels naturally dip in winter, not as malfunction but as biological echo of nature's pause. Consider the Ainu tribes of Japan, who spent winters carving intricate patterns into wooden prayer sticks called inno. This wasn't mere craft, it was meditative practice, each stroke a tactile mantra aligning hands with the season's slower tempo. Across the Pacific, the Tlingit people held winter potlatches where grievances from active months were settled through marathon storytelling sessions, transforming summer's heat into winter's wisdom. These rituals mirror Stoic winter journaling. Seneca often wrote of using cold months for husbanding the soul's harvest, when shorter days forced introspection like trees drawing sap inward. The brilliance of tribal timekeeping lay in its flexibility. The Yupik Eskimos recognized not 4 seasons but 6, including Yukiak, deep winter, and Upnangak, the false spring thaw. Each demanded distinct emotional postures: patience during Yukiak's endless night, cautious optimism during Upnangak's deceptive warmth. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy has stumbled upon similar strategies, teaching clients to recognize emotional seasons and adjust mental habits accordingly. A University of Vermont study found patients who synced therapy goals with seasonal energy levels showed 40% better adherence than those rigidly fighting nature's flow. Your challenge isn't to adopt an ancestral lunar calendar. Start simpler. Choose one habit: exercise, creativity, socializing, and let it breathe with the seasons like the Maori fishing cycles. Maybe summer runs become winter yoga sessions, mirroring how Cherokee hunters traded spears for traps when leaves fell. Or perhaps you borrow the ancient Greek Stoics' paraskew, preparing autumn intellectual stores like squirrels gathering nuts. The Lakota measured years not by birthdays but by winters survived, each one a notch of resilience. Your modern version might be a winter journal where you distill summer's experiences into winter's wisdom, then compost that wisdom into spring's action. The Earth's oldest lesson whispers through frozen branches and autumn migrations. Resistance to cycles creates suffering, while alignment cultivates strength. As the Inuit say when blizzards roar, you don't stop the storm, you learn to dance in its currents. Your emotional resilience needn't be static. Let it ebb and flow like the tides those tribal ancestors studied so closely, finding in their rhythms not obstacles but ancient allies. Seneca wrote, "To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover the prisoner was you." Ancient tribes lived this truth through rituals that transformed vengeance into renewal ceremonies where grudges weren't buried but alchemized. Among the Ndembu of Zambia, 2 feuding villagers would drink from the same cup of Mpelu medicine, their lips touching the rim where the others had been. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was physiological reconciliation. The shared brew contained mild emetics, causing both to vomit together, a visceral purging of hostility as their bodies expelled bitterness in unison. The Stoics would nod in recognition. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Consider the Tlingit Ku Eeks ceremony, where wrongdoers endured 4 days of public shaming through satirical songs composed by their victims. Yet at the climax, the entire village would shower them with gifts, not as absolution, but as investment in their reformed future. Modern restorative justice programs echo this wisdom. A University of Pennsylvania study found crime victims who participated in face-to-face mediation reported 60% less anger than those who relied on punitive courts. The Maori Wakanoa rituals took it further. Offenders literally stepped over the prostrate bodies of those they'd wronged. Not as humiliation, but as physical proof the community still trusted them to choose restraint. Here's where tribal forgiveness surpasses modern self-help platitudes. The Ifugao people of the Philippines practiced bogwa, exhuming bones of the deceased so living adversaries could whisper unresolved grievances to skeletons. Macabre, perhaps, but psychologists now recognize what the Ifugao knew: unspoken words to the dead often block reconciliation with the living. Your challenge isn't bone digging but borrowed wisdom. Write a letter to someone who wronged you. Not to send, this isn't about their response, but to burn or bury in a private ritual. Detail every hurt, then add what Seneca told Lucilius: I choose to see this not as what was taken, but what it taught. The Cherokee Booger dance offers one final insight. Villagers wore masks representing their enemies, acting out conflicts until laughter dissolved tension. Notice the pattern. Tribes ritualized forgiveness as physical acts: shared vomiting, bone whispering, satirical singing, because they understood what neuroscience confirms: emotions embed in the body. You can't think your way to forgiveness any more than you can think your way through a spear wound. That's why your unsent letter should end with a somatic act. Tear it slowly, savoring each rip as release, or fold it into a paper boat and watch the current carry it downstream. The Stoics and tribes agreed. True clemency isn't passive forgetting but active transformation, where the weight you drop becomes wings. Epictetus argued, no man is free who is not master of himself, a truth ancient tribes embodied through brutal yet deliberate training in discomfort. Picture a young Lakota warrior standing bare-chested in a blizzard, his breath visible in the freezing air as elders pour icy water over his shoulders. This wasn't hazing, it was education. Across the Arctic, Inuit fathers taught sons to sleep with only a thin seal hide between their bodies and the snow, believing true resilience grew from familiarity with the edge of survival. These rituals anticipated Stoic voluntary hardship by centuries, turning physical endurance into emotional armor. Modern science now reveals why these practices work. When the body confronts cold, it triggers a cascade of stress responses: vasoconstriction, adrenaline surges, rapid breathing. But with repeated exposure, something remarkable happens. The nervous system learns to modulate its reaction. The Maori Tomoko artists understood this instinctively. Before tattooing warriors with chisel and ink, they'd immerse them in frigid streams to practice controlled breathing, a technique identical to today's Wim Hof method. Research from Radboud University shows regular cold exposure can reduce inflammatory markers by up to 30%. Proving tribal endurance training was as much about mental fortitude as physical toughness. The connection to modern biohacking trends is undeniable. Silicon Valley executives pay thousands for cryotherapy chambers, while Instagram influencers boast of morning ice baths, yet these are pale imitations of tribal rites. The Sami reindeer herders of Scandinavia didn't chase discomfort as a productivity hack. They embraced it as spiritual preparation. Before major migrations, they'd sit naked in snowdrifts for hours, singing traditional joiks to maintain rhythmical breathing. Their goal wasn't just surviving the cold, but mastering the fear response itself, what Epictetus called the discipline of ascent. Here's where ancient wisdom surpasses modern trends. Tribal cold training wasn't isolated suffering, it was woven into communal growth. During Yupik initiation rites, adolescents would plunge into frozen rivers while elders watched from shore, not as spectators but as living proof of survival's sweetness. Contrast that with today's solitary ice baths tracked by smartwatches. The difference lies in meaning. Where modern practices often prioritize bragging rights, tribal rituals link discomfort to deeper purpose. A Cherokee father might send his son into winter streams not to toughen up, but to teach that numbness passes just as grief does. Your challenge isn't to replicate extreme rituals, but to borrow their intentionality. Start with 30 seconds of cold shower time, not as punishment, but as daily rehearsal for life's unforeseen chills. As the water hits your skin, focus not on enduring, but on observing the gasp reflex, the urge to escape, the eventual settling of your breath. Like a stoic examining impressions before assenting to them, you're training the mind to witness discomfort without being hijacked by it. The Maori have a saying about their legendary warriors: they didn't ignore the shiver, they made it their ally. Your morning shower can become the same, a miniature wilderness where you practice keeping calm while the storm rages. This isn't about becoming impervious to feeling. Notice how Inuit hunters emerging from icy waters would rub their hands together vigorously, restoring circulation with deliberate friction. Their wisdom reminds us, endurance without recovery is just another form of avoidance. After your cold exposure, take 2 minutes to feel warmth returning to your limbs, noting how the body's resilience mirrors the mind's capacity to rebound from hardship. The Stoics called this premeditatio, the pre-rehearsal of challenges to appreciate present comforts. Tribal cultures lived it daily, turning every frostbite morning into a masterclass in gratitude for simple survival. Marcus Aurelius once reflected, "What has been is still out in front of you," recognizing that the past isn't just behind us, it's a compass we carry forward. Ancient tribes lived this truth through what anthropologists now call ancestral memory, treating the voices of long-gone elders as living counsel. The Dagara people of Burkina Faso didn't merely recount genealogies. They performed elaborate rituals where elders channeled specific ancestors to advise on droughts or disputes. This wasn't superstition, it was sophisticated emotional time travel. When a young warrior faced impossible odds, he didn't rely solely on his own courage. He drew from the collective resilience of every ancestor who'd survived similar trials before him. The Stoics practiced parallel wisdom. Seneca's letters overflow with lessons from Cato and Socrates, while Epictetus urged students to walk with the dead, treating history's great minds as invisible mentors. Oral traditions were the hard drives of tribal wisdom, encoded for perfect recall. The griots of West Africa could recite family histories spanning 20 generations without a single written word. Their secret, kinesthetic memory, weaving facts into rhythmic songs accompanied by deliberate hand gestures, a technique modern memory champions still use today. Australian Aboriginal elders taught star navigation through songlines, where every hill and waterhole in a 1,000-mile journey was memorized as musical notes. Compare this to our reliance on cloud storage and search engines. While we scroll through fragmented digital archives, tribes carried entire libraries in their bones, ensuring no survival lesson was ever more than a chant away. Your grandmother's faded recipe card holds a version of this power. That scribbled instruction to let the dough rise twice isn't just baking advice. It's ancestral resilience passed through flour-dusted shorthand. Modern genealogy services like Ancestry.com offer tantalizing fragments, ship manifests, census records, but tribes went beyond names and dates. The Maori Wakapapa charts didn't just list forebears, they included each ancestor's defining trials: Tain, who walked the burning desert, or Rangi, who rebuilt the village after the tsunami. These weren't footnotes, they were emotional blueprints. When a Maori child struggled, elders would say, "Remember whose blood heats your heart," linking present struggle to past victories. Here's how to bridge ancient and modern. This week, sit with someone over 70 and ask not just what happened, but how did you keep going? Record their voice as they describe surviving the 1973 oil crisis or caring for siblings during wartime. Notice how their hands move when recounting resilience. Those gestures are kinesthetic memory in action. the same technique griots used to preserve centuries of wisdom. Then take a page from Stoic journaling. Write their story in your own words, not as history but as future preparation. Marcus Aurelius filled his meditations with borrowed wisdom because he knew truth outlives its tellers. Your great-grandmother's strategy for mending clothes during rationing might just hold the key to your next creative breakthrough. The Cherokee say, "When you wake from a dream, you've only seen one side of the blanket." Ancestral memory turns life's fabric to reveal the patterns woven by those who held the thread before us. Whether through tribal songlines or your uncle's Vietnam letters, the principle remains: you're never facing a storm alone. You're standing on the shoulders of every ancestor who learned to dance in the rain. Seneca wrote, "The mind must be exercised as well as the body," a truth ancient tribes embodied through rituals where emotions didn't just stay trapped in the mind. They flowed through every muscle and bone. Picture the whirling dervishes of Sufi tradition, spinning until individual sorrow dissolved into collective ecstasy, or the Yoruba people's Egungun dances, where masked performers channeled ancestral spirits through precise, rhythmic movements. These weren't performances, they were kinetic philosophy, physical echoes of Stoic beliefs about mind-body unity. When Seneca said, "The soul and the body must be trained together," he could have been describing the Navajo Nightway ceremony, where healers danced for 9 straight nights to restore harmony in patients, not by talking through trauma but by moving it out through the soles of their feet. Modern dance therapy now confirms what these cultures knew: movement unlocks what words can't. A Harvard study found that patients who expressed grief through improvised movement showed 30% greater reduction in depression symptoms than those relying solely on talk therapy. The mechanism mirrors tribal practices. When the body enacts emotions through motion, the brain rewires its response. The Maasai warriors' adumu, or jumping dance, wasn't just a test of strength, it was a communal pressure valve. Young men would leap higher and higher, not to compete but to transmute pre-battle anxiety into focused energy, their feet stamping fear into the earth with each landing. Here's where ancient wisdom meets modern science. The Kung people of the Kalahari practiced N/Umtichai, dancing around fires until they entered trance states to heal sickness. Neuroscientists now recognize these rituals as early biohacking, the rhythmic movement and drumming synchronizing brainwaves, dropping practitioners into theta states where deep emotional processing occurs. It's the same principle behind EMDR therapy, where guided eye movements help reprocess trauma. The difference: tribes turned healing into communal art, where the whole village participated in one another's emotional alchemy. Your challenge isn't to master tribal dance steps. Start simpler. The next time frustration knots your shoulders or joy bubbles in your chest, let it move you. Stand barefoot and sway like a Cherokee willow in wind, or stomp out anger like a Maori haka warrior shaking the ground. The form matters less than the intention, to let your body speak what your mind can't yet articulate. The Stoics journaled to untangle thoughts, tribes danced to untangle emotions. Both paths lead to the same truth: feelings buried alive never die, they just find another way to move through you. Consider flamenco, born from Romani oppression in Spain. Every sharp heel strike and clawing hand gesture a testament to survival. Or the Japanese awa-odori, where dancers chant, "Fools dance, fools watch. If both are fools, you might as well dance." There's profound Stoic resonance here. If life's suffering is inevitable, we might as well turn it into rhythm. Modern, ecstatic dance movements in cities worldwide unknowingly revive this tribal wisdom, proving Seneca right: the body isn't just a vessel for the mind, it's its most honest interpreter. Tonight, try this. Put on a song that mirrors your current emotional weather. Close your eyes and let your limbs respond without choreography, as the Dagara people do during moon ceremonies. Don't perform, listen. Your clenched fists might reveal unresolved tension. An unexpected shimmy could uncover buried joy. The Sioux say, the body never lies about what the mouth is afraid to speak. Whether through tribal circle dances or solitary kitchen swaying, movement remains the oldest language of healing, one that needs no translation, only the courage to let go and let the dance carry you home. Epictetus advised his students to let your reviews be like the moon's phases, regular, unhurried, and illuminating what was once hidden. Ancient tribes didn't just track lunar cycles for planting crops or hunting tides. They used those 28-day rhythms as a mirror for the soul. The Lakota called the moon Hanwi, the eternal grandmother who witnessed their struggles without judgment. Each new crescent marked a communal pause. Warriors would gather under its slim light to recount recent battles, not in terms of victories or defeats, but as lessons in emotional discipline. A hunter might confess how panic caused him to misfire his arrow, while another reflected on maintaining steady breath during a bear charge. These weren't debriefings, they were lunar-powered stoic journals, aligning inner growth with celestial certainty. Modern productivity gurus preach monthly reviews, but tribes went deeper. The Maori divided the lunar month into Maramataka, assigning specific emotional work to each phase. Waning moons were for releasing grudges like the tide receding, while waxing periods focused on cultivating courage as the light grew. During full moons, the Yupik elders would lead adolescents to frozen lakes, asking them to stare at their reflections in the ice-cracked moonlight and name one fear they'd outgrown that cycle. The ritual mirrored Epictetus' discipline of desire, examining what we truly control by confronting our distorted self-images. Contemporary science now validates these practices. Sleep researchers at the University of Basel discovered human melatonin levels fluctuate with moon phases, explaining why tribal moon lodges reserved the darkest nights for deep introspection. Your smartphone might track your sleep, but the Tlingit people tracked dreams against moon phases, recognizing patterns in emotional turbulence that aligned with gravitational pulls. When corporate retreats schedule quarterly reviews, they're working against biology. Our brains naturally reset attention spans and emotional baselines every 4 weeks, just as the moon resets its face. Here's your lunar journal prompt. On the next new moon, light a candle and list 3 emotional reactions you regret, not to shame yourself, but to spot their lunar rhythm like the Cherokee tracking animal migration. By the following full moon, choose one to transform through deliberate practice. Maybe it's pausing for 3 breaths when criticized instead of retaliating, or visualizing success before a high-stakes meeting like a Maori warrior rehearsing battle under the Marama moon. Record your progress not in metrics but in moonlit metaphors. Did you feel like the thin crescent, barely visible but growing, or the gibbous moon, nearly full but with edges still to polish? The Stoics and tribes shared one radical belief: time isn't linear but cyclical. Your anger today mirrors last month's frustration, just as tonight's moon reflects the same light that guided Seneca's evening meditations. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look back over the past with its changing empires," he might as well have been describing the moon's eternal dance of shadow and illumination. Your life isn't a straight path but a spiral, each lunar cycle bringing you face to face with familiar challenges at wiser altitudes. The moon doesn't judge its phases, and neither should you. It simply keeps turning, knowing darkness is never the end, just the necessary contrast for the next glow. Marcus Aurelius reflected in his private journals, "Do not think that what is hard for you to master is humanly impossible. but if a thing is humanly possible, consider it to be within your reach. Ancient tribes didn't just believe this, they ritualized it through ceremonies that turned abstract growth into tangible transformation. Among the Lakota, a boy returning from his vision quest wasn't simply welcomed home. His entire community participated in the Hunka ceremony, where elders painted his face with sacred designs as visible proof of his new spiritual rank. Each stroke of pigment marked the death of his childhood self and the birth of his warrior identity, turning personal evolution into communal witness. The Stoics practiced similar marking of progress, though less visibly. Seneca measured his philosophical advancement by how calmly he endured minor irritations, a spilled cup of wine becoming an opportunity to celebrate emotional control. But tribes took this further, creating physical manifestations of inner change. The Maasai Unoto ceremony transformed warriors into elders through weeks of rituals, heads shaved, spears broken, and new robes bestowed. Every act served as a checkpoint, forcing participants to acknowledge growth that might otherwise go unnoticed in daily life. Modern psychology confirms the power of such markers. Studies on progress principle show that visible indicators of advancement boost motivation by up to 40%. Your graduation cap, wedding ring, or even gym milestone stickers unknowingly echo these ancient practices, but tribal ceremonies held deeper wisdom than our modern markers often capture. The Aboriginal walkabout wasn't complete until the initiate returned with a songline, a musical map of their journey's lessons that would guide others. The Cherokee Booger dance used grotesque masks to represent outgrown fears, which were then burned in a communal fire. These weren't passive recognitions but active alchemy, turning private struggles into collective wisdom. Here's where we've lost nuance. Tribal rites focused less on the endpoint than the metamorphosis itself. A Zulu warrior's Aqualuka circumcision ritual included 30 days of isolation, not to celebrate manhood, but to etch the memory of transition into his bones. The Stoics similarly valued the process. Epictetus taught students to keep 2 jars, dropping a stone into one for each day they practiced patience, into another for each lapse. The jars weren't about tallying wins but observing patterns in their growth. Your challenge isn't to stage an elaborate ceremony, but to borrow this intentionality. Choose a personal growth goal, maybe morning consistency or temper control, and create a simple ritual marker. Perhaps it's transferring a pebble between pockets each time you resist snapping at coworkers, or brewing a special tea after 7 consecutive days of meditation. The key lies in physicality, like the Inuit carving tiny ivory figures to represent conquered fears. Make your progress something you can hold. One Silicon Valley executive adapted this by keeping failure beads, adding one to her bracelet for each major setback, reframed as learning. The Ndembu tribe's Mukanda initiation offers a final insight. Boys returning from the bush wore anklets of dried seeds that rattled with every step, a constant auditory reminder of their transformed status. Your ritual might be quieter, a fingerprint smudged on notebook margins tracking days without procrastination, or a screensaver that changes as you master a skill. The form matters less than the function, turning invisible growth into something even your senses can recognize. Because as the Stoics knew and tribes lived, transformation unattended often feels like standing still, while transformation ritualized becomes impossible to ignore. Seneca observed, "Delay is the greatest remedy for anger," but ancient tribes turned this Stoic principle into sacred law. Among the Iroquois Confederacy, no major decision, whether declaring war or adopting new members, could pass without a mandatory cooling time of at least 1 lunar cycle. Elders called this waiting until the ground speaks, a practice that forced heated emotions to settle like silt in a stirred river. The Dagara people of West Africa took it further. Disputes between villagers weren't just paused but ritualized through fire mediation, where conflicting parties would sit silently across a communal flame for 3 sunrises before speaking. The fire's gradual dimming mirrored their tempers' ebb, proving deliberation wasn't passive, it was emotional alchemy in motion. Modern, cooling-off periods pale in comparison. Court-ordered restraining orders and online purchase return windows borrow the shell of this wisdom but miss its essence. Tribal pauses weren't about preventing regret but preserving relationship fabric. When Maori warriors returned from battle, they entered War Wakero, carved meeting houses designed to slow speech through sacred acoustics. The ceiling beams absorbed rash words while amplifying measured tones. Neuroscience now explains why this worked. MRI scans show the amygdala's fear response takes 26 minutes to fully reset after provocation. The Lakota knew this instinctively. Their council pipe circulated 7 times before any vote, ensuring each member's prefrontal cortex overrode primal impulses. Your challenge isn't to recreate moon-long deliberations, but to implement what Silicon Valley calls the 24-hour rule with tribal intentionality. Before sending that angry email or committing to a life-altering decision, borrow the Mentawai shaman's practice of Saikre, sleeping with the question under your pillow while medicinal herbs steeped beside you. Modernize it, type your reactive message but save it in drafts. Walk around the block while visualizing Seneca's advice to put many days between you and the offense. Notice how the Cherokee booger dance turned grievances into communal comedy. What if your delayed response included humor to diffuse tension? The brilliance of tribal pauses lay in their structured spontaneity. Zulu elders would interrupt heated debates by suddenly demanding everyone identify 5 bird songs, forcing cognitive shifts through sensory anchoring. Try this twist when conflict arises. Pause not just to breathe, but to physically change your environment. Stand barefoot on grass as the Aboriginal elders did during Tijoranga stone ceremonies, letting Earth's conductivity ground emotional static. The Stoics called it taking the view from above. Tribes made it literal by climbing prayer mounds before finalizing decisions. What we dismiss as procrastination, ancestors revered as wisdom in waiting. The Japanese samurai's tea ceremony before battle and the Norwegian forest Finn's practice of carving decision sticks during sauna sessions share a common thread, creating somatic bookends around choices. Your version might involve brewing tea before replying to criticism, the steam recalling Seneca's words, "Time discovers truth." Not every delay is avoidance. Sometimes it's the sacred space where impulse transforms into intention. Epictetus once told his students, "First say to yourself what kind of person you want to be, then do what you have to do." Ancient tribes took this directive beyond human examples. They looked to the animal kingdom for living blueprints of resilience. The Lakota warrior studied the patience of the wolf stalking prey through winter storms. The Maori fisherman internalized the albatross's effortless navigation across trackless oceans. These weren't poetic metaphors, they were survival strategies, turning creatures into mentors long before Stoic philosophers urged emulation of virtuous role models. Consider the Apache Dian ceremonies, where adolescents spent nights alone in the wilderness awaiting visions of spirit animals. If an owl appeared, they learned to observe silently before acting. A bear visitation taught strategic withdrawal during harsh seasons. Modern psychology now validates this ancient practice. Studies on embodied cognition show that when people adopt physical postures of animals they admire, standing rooted like an oak or poised like a heron, their decision-making improves by nearly 20%. The Stoics would recognize this immediately. Their writings overflow with exhortations to be like the rock the waves keep crashing over, or to emulate water's adaptability. This tribal wisdom collides beautifully with modern mentorship, where we scroll LinkedIn profiles seeking human advisors. Ancestors studied paw prints and wing beats. The Cheyenne didn't just admire the eagle's flight, they dissected its traits. Keen vision translated to foreseeing consequences. Soaring height became big-picture thinking. Roman generals did the same, adopting wolf pack tactics for military formations. Your challenge isn't to shun human mentors, but to expand your gallery of role models. That hummingbird darting outside your window, it's demonstrating relentless energy management. The squirrel storing nuts, a master of preparedness. Here's where tribal practices surpass superficial inspiration. The Haida people's totem poles weren't decorative, they were three-dimensional textbooks. Each carved raven or killer whale encoded specific survival wisdom. The raven's trickery teaching creative problem solving, the orca's pod hunting demonstrating teamwork. Compare this to modern spirit animal quizzes that reduce profound symbolism to personality labels. Real emulation requires what the Stoics called prosoph, attention to detail. When Zulu boys tracked lions, they noted not just the predator's courage but its calculated rest periods between hunts. Your turn. Choose one non-human teacher this week. Maybe it's the ant's relentless work ethic or the octopus's adaptability in changing tides. Observe it with tribal intentionality. How does it handle obstacles? What can its movements teach you about pacing or patience? The Inuit say, the seal doesn't fight the ice, it finds the breathing holes. That's stoic resilience in a single sentence. Whether you adopt the resilience of migrating geese or the focus of a stalking cat, remember what Epictetus knew and tribes lived. Wisdom walks on four legs, flies on wings, and swims in deep waters, if we're humble enough to learn. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called doorway meditations, pausing at each threshold to recenter himself before entering a new space. This wasn't mere superstition. It was training in presence, a stoic exercise to prevent the mind from dragging the chaos of one environment into the next. Ancient tribes took this further, turning physical crossings into sacred ceremonies. The Maori would recite karakia incantations when stepping into a forest, acknowledging the shift from human domain to the realm of Tain Mahuta, god of the woods. The Cherokee placed bent willow branches over doorways, not just as decoration but as tactile reminders to leave distractions outside, like shaking rain from a cloak. These rituals shared a common thread. Thresholds weren't just architectural features but psychological checkpoints. The Norse carved protective runes above their longhouse doors, not because they feared literal spirits, but to symbolize the mental transition from warrior to family man. Modern neuroscience reveals why this worked. Crossing a physical threshold triggers the brain's event boundary mechanism, making it easier to shift mental states. A University of Notre Dame study found workers who paused at office doorways to take a breath reported 23% fewer task switching errors. Here's where tribal wisdom meets modern habit stacking. Instead of rushing from your car to your kitchen, try the Zulu Yukukabanga practice. Stop at your front door and name one burden you're leaving outside, like removing muddy shoes. When entering your workspace, borrow the Japanese Shinto tradition of clapping twice, not to summon deities, but to create an auditory cue that signals focus mode. The act isn't about the sound, it's about the deliberate pause, what Seneca called the space between impulse and action. Threshold mindfulness transforms mundane transitions into micro-meditations. The Aboriginal practice of dragging bare feet across doorstep stones served a dual purpose, cleaning souls and grounding thoughts. Your modern equivalent might be touching a specific tile or hanging wind chimes that force you to slow down. The Inuit would blow gently over water before entering ice huts, watching their breath dissipate as a reminder to release distractions. Try exhaling slowly when unlocking your phone, letting that breath mark the shift from open awareness to intentional engagement. These practices aren't about adding more to your day but reclaiming the spaces between. The Stoics knew what tribes lived. Life happens in transitions as much as destinations. That moment when your hand hovers over a doorknob, it's a miniature amphitheater where you can choose presence over autopilot. The next time you cross from one room to another, imagine you're a Lakota scout stepping onto new terrain, alert, respectful, and utterly here. Under the vast African sky, the Maasai elders would gather around the embers of a dying fire, passing a ceremonial staff as they spoke. Only the elder holding the staff could voice his thoughts, a practice ensuring every perspective was heard without interruption. This fire circle council wasn't just about resolving disputes, it was a living embodiment of Stoic cosmopolitanism, the belief that all humans share a common reason and dignity. Seneca captured this perfectly when he wrote, "We are members of one great body. Nature planted in us a mutual love. For tribes, the circle wasn't symbolic, it was sacred geometry, a physical manifestation of equality where the chief sat no higher than the youngest warrior." The brilliance of these councils lay in their structure. The Lakota's Kanon Pawakan, sacred pipe ceremony, required speakers to hold the pipe while sharing grievances, grounding words in the weight of truth. Cherokee councils used a talking stick inlaid with wolf fur, a reminder to speak with the animal's balance of courage and restraint. These rituals mirrored Stoic sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all things, by making conflict resolution a communal responsibility rather than an authoritarian decree. Modern restorative justice programs have rediscovered this wisdom. Schools implementing circle processes report 40% fewer suspensions, while corporations using council-style meetings see decision acceptance rates double. Yet tribes added a layer. Modern circles often miss the element of time. The Kung people of the Kalahari would debate for days, sometimes weeks, until consensus emerged like water pooling in a desert basin. There was no voting, no majority rule, just relentless dialogue until the entire circle could say, "we" instead of "I." Compare this to today's rushed Zoom meetings where consensus often means silencing dissent. The Stoics would nod in recognition. Epictetus taught that truth emerges through the grinding of minds, not the tyranny of haste. Here's where ancient practice becomes modern medicine. The next time your team faces a gridlock, try the Haudenosaunee condolence ceremony approach. Before problem solving, each member shares one personal challenge unrelated to work. This vulnerability ritual, what psychologists now call affective priming, creates neural bridges that elevate collective reasoning. Or borrow the Aboriginal yarning circle, where participants pass a coiled rope while speaking, physically weaving their words into a visible tapestry of connection. Your challenge isn't to recreate elaborate rituals. Start with Seneca's simplest counsel. Treat your inferiors as you would be treated by your superiors. Host a solution-focused gathering where phones are banned, and the only rule is the Zulu principle of Ubuntu, I am because we are. Place a bowl of water at the center like the Dagara people do, symbolizing that all voices should flow together. When tensions rise, pause to observe 3 breaths in unison, mirroring the synchronized inhales of Maori war chanters preparing for battle. The fire circle's magic wasn't in the flames but in the faces they illuminated, each flicker revealing another angle of the same truth. Epictetus declared, "No man is free who does not command himself, yet true freedom blooms in service to others." This paradoxical truth was etched into the bones of tribal societies through rituals that transformed generosity into emotional alchemy. Among the Kwakiutl tribes of the Pacific Northwest, chiefs competed not in hoarding wealth but in spectacular acts of giving blankets, carved boxes, even canoes piled high during potlatch ceremonies that left them materially poorer yet spiritually enriched. These weren't reckless giveaways but psychological masterstrokes. By voluntarily surrendering what others clung to, they proved their independence from material attachment centuries before Stoic philosophers preached similar detachment. The brilliance of tribal gift economies lay in their dual purpose. When a Lakota warrior gave away his finest horse to a grieving family, he wasn't just offering transportation. He was performing emotional surgery on his own soul. Anthropologists recorded one elder's explanation: "Giving cuts the cords of sorrow that tie us to earthly things." Modern neuroscience confirms this wisdom. MRI scans show that charitable giving activates the mesolimbic pathway, the brain's reward circuit, with equal intensity as receiving money. But tribes added a crucial layer. Their giving was often anonymous or indirect. The Maori practiced koha, leaving gifts in communal spaces without claiming credit, while the Hadza hunters of Tanzania would secretly replenish a struggling neighbor's food stores under cover of darkness. Compare this to today's performative philanthropy: donation receipts flaunted on social media, corporate sponsorships demanding logo placement. The Cherokee had a term for true service, a dadaligi, meaning to lose oneself in the act of helping. Their healers would enter sick rooms backwards, avoiding eye contact with patients to prevent any hint of ego contaminating the care. This mirrors Epictetus' warning about service poisoned by desire for recognition, a danger modern volunteerism often stumbles into when motivations blur between compassion and resume building. Here's where ancient wisdom becomes urgently practical. The Dagara people of Burkina Faso treated communal work as emotional medicine. When depression struck a villager, elders prescribed not isolation but mandatory service, grinding grain for widows. Psychologists now validate this approach. A Johns Hopkins study found clinically depressed patients who volunteered regularly showed symptom reduction equal to medication in 43% of cases. The mechanism works both ways. The rhythmic motion of grinding grain or weaving baskets regulates the nervous system, while the act of contribution rebuilds fractured self-worth. Your challenge isn't to donate money or join a formal charity. Borrow the subtlety of tribal giving, pay for a stranger's coffee, and vanish before thanks arrives. Leave umbrellas at bus stops before rainstorms with anonymous notes. When you spot a neighbor struggling with groceries, help carry them, then melt away like the Hadza under moonlight. The Stoics called this the discipline of action, service so pure it leaves no fingerprints, like the Navajo weavers who intentionally leave flaws in their rugs so their souls won't be trapped in perfection. Your secret kindnesses keep generosity untethered from expectation. The Tlingit elders said, "What you give away is all you truly keep." This week, let your hidden act of service be the thread that stitches someone else's wound while quietly strengthening your own resilience. No plaques, no posts, just the silent alchemy Epictetus described when he wrote, "In serving others, we forge our own chains into bridges." From the Arctic tundra to the marble halls of ancient Rome, humanity's most profound insights into emotional resilience share a startling symmetry. The tribal elder sitting in sacred silence before speaking, and the Stoic journaling at dawn both recognized the same truth: mastery begins in the pause between impulse and action. The Maori warriors' haka chant and Seneca's evening reflections served identical purposes. ritual as emotional anvil, forging discipline through repetition. These parallel practices weren't coincidental, they were inevitable responses to the universal human condition. Consider how both traditions harnessed nature as teacher. The Inuit hunter reading ice patterns to survive and Marcus Aurelius meditating on river currents arrived at the same conclusion. Resistance to change creates suffering, while adaptation cultivates strength. Tribal fire circles and Stoic cosmopolitanism both revealed that community isn't just company, it's the mirror that shows us our unvarnished selves. The Lakota talking stick and Epictetus lectures achieved the same end, wisdom transmitted through generations, not as abstract theory but as lived practice. What makes this convergence so powerful is its accessibility. You don't need a sweat lodge or a philosopher's robe to apply these hybrid principles. Start small. Tomorrow morning, combine tribal threshold awareness with Stoic intention setting. Pause at your doorway like a Cherokee crossing into sacred space. Then whisper Marcus Aurelius' reminder, you have power over your mind, not outside events, before stepping into your day. Or borrow the Dagara practice of communal storytelling by sharing one hard-earned lesson with a colleague, not as advice but as Seneca-style, letters from experience. The true test of these traditions lies not in their antiquity but in their utility. When a Navajo grandmother weaves imperfection into her rug and a Stoic scribbles, "This too shall pass" in his diary, they're deploying the same psychological armor. Modern science now confirms what both knew. Ritual regulates the nervous system, nature restores attention, and community buffers against despair. These aren't relics, they're tools. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his final days, look within. Within is the fountain of good, always ready to overflow if you keep digging. Your inner citadel, like a tribal longhouse, needs daily maintenance, not grand renovations but mindful repairs. This week, choose one strand from this ancient tapestry to weave into your life. Maybe it's the Maori moon journaling practice blended with Stoic evening reviews, or the Inuit breath-holding technique paired with Epictetus' discipline of ascent. The fire circle now passes to you. Which of these hybrid practices resonates most? Share your thoughts in the comments, not as detached observers, but as fellow travelers on this path. Because the most profound truth these traditions reveal is this: emotional mastery was never meant to be solitary. From tribal councils to Stoic correspondence, we've always grown strongest when wisdom flows both ways. Your story might be the missing piece in someone else's puzzle. The circle remains